The dust of the forward operating base tasted of grit and failed expectations. It coated everything in a fine, khaki-colored film, a constant reminder of their precarious perch in the Razorback Peaks. FOB Vigilance was a temporary scar on the ancient landscape, a collection of sand-colored shelters and humming generators dropped into a war zone defined by altitude and anonymity. Into this world of hard edges and high technology walked Sergeant Anya Sharma. She didn't arrive with the main contingent of specialist reinforcements, a fact that immediately set her apart. They had come in on a sleek V-22 Osprey, disgorging a platoon of young, ramrod-straight soldiers bristling with the latest in warfare technology. Sharma arrived in the back of a rattling supply truck, sitting silently beside a pallet of MREs and water canisters. When she stepped down, the contrast was jarring. The other soldiers wore brand-new multicam, their gear smelling of polymer and factory sterility. Sharma's uniform was faded at the knees and elbows, worn soft by time and use. The lines on her face were etched by a sun harsher than this one, her dark eyes holding a stillness that seemed to absorb the chaotic energy of the base. Corporal Jace Miller, who went by the call sign Rook, noticed her first. He and his fire team were calibrating the scopes on their new XM-21 sniper systems, marvels of engineering with integrated ballistic computers, atmospheric sensors, and direct uplinks to Command's tactical network. Rook, barely 22 and already the best shot in his battalion, saw himself as the future of marksmanship. "Hey, check it out," he nudged Private Chun, his spotter. "Looks like supply scraped the bottom of the barrel for this op." Sharma had unslung her rifle case. It wasn't the hardshell polymer case the others used. It was a well-worn canvas drag bag, stained with oil and dirt from a dozen different environments. From it, she produced a rifle that made Rook openly snicker. It was a Remington 700, or at least it had been born as one. The wooden stock was dark with age and linseed oil, scarred with countless nicks and scratches. A thick layer of what looked like burlap wrap, coated in a hardened epoxy, covered the barrel and scope. The bolt was worn smooth, the metal gleaming with a patina that only comes from being worked thousands upon thousands of times. It looked less like a precision instrument and more like a piece of historical ordnance. "Is that a museum piece?" Another soldier from Rook's team whispered, loud enough to carry on the thin, mountain air. "My grandpa had one of those for hunting deer." Sharma heard them. Her expression didn't change. She moved to a clear space away from the others, laying out a worn canvas mat. Her movements were an exercise in economy, each one purposeful and devoid of flourish. She broke down the rifle with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic. The bolt slid out with a quiet, oiled shick. She checked the chamber, the rifling, the trigger assembly, her fingers moving with the certainty of a surgeon examining a familiar limb. There was no manual, no tablet computer displaying schematics. The knowledge was in her hands, in the muscle memory of a lifetime. Rook watched, his amusement turning into a kind of morbid curiosity. "Look at that scope. It's an old Leupold. No digital overlay, no rangefinder. She's probably got to lick her finger and stick it in the air to judge the wind." His team laughed. They were children of a digital age, warriors who trusted algorithms and processing power over instinct. Their rifles were networked weapons, extensions of a central command computer that fed them firing solutions in milliseconds. Sharma's rifle was an island, a completely analog tool in a digital ocean. To them, it wasn't just old. It was obsolete, a liability. Sharma ignored the commentary. She produced a small, leather-bound book and a pencil. Her logbook. Inside, the pages were filled with dense, neat script, recording data from thousands of shots in hundreds of locations. Temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, ammunition lot numbers, cold bore shifts, muzzle velocity deviations. It was a lifetime of data, an analog database more comprehensive than any software. She made a few notes, recording the current atmospheric conditions of FOB Vigilance. She reassembled the rifle, the parts fitting together with a seamless, practice click. The sound was solid, mechanical, a stark contrast to the quiet electronic hum of the XM-21s. When she was done, she didn't join the others. She sat with her back against a stack of sandbags, the rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning the jagged peaks that surrounded them. She was a silent, weathered statue amidst the nervous energy of the young soldiers, a relic who didn't seem to know she was already extinct. The mockery settled around her like the dust, and she paid it no mind at all. The mission briefing was held in the Tactical Operations Center, a cramped, air-conditioned container buzzing with the glow of 24 monitors. Colonel Davies stood before a large holographic map of the Razorback Peaks, his posture as rigid as the creases in his uniform. He was a man who had built his career on the doctrine of technological supremacy. He spoke of network-centric warfare, of data links and drone support, of the enemy's reliance on primitive tactics that would be no match for their advanced systems. Our primary objective, he said, pointing to a red circle on the map, is this suspected communications node. It's nestled in a valley heavily fortified. Intel suggests it's the command and control for their entire regional network. We will insert 2 sniper/observer teams on these ridges. He indicated 2 high points overlooking the valley, to provide overwatch and eliminate high-value targets before the main assault force moves in. Team Alpha, led by Corporal Miller, you have the primary position on Ridge A. Your XM-21s will give you a decisive advantage. Rook and his team stood a little straighter, their pride evident. They were the tip of the spear. Davies's eyes then scanned the room and landed on Sharma. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He had seen her on the firing line, her ancient rifle a jarring anomaly among the sleek, modern weapons of his elite unit. He turned to Master Sergeant Thorne, a grizzled veteran who served as his senior NCO. Master Sergeant, Davies said, his voice low but carrying in the quiet room. Who is she? She wasn't on the original manifest. Thorne, a man who had seen more than his share of colonels come and go, answered evenly. Sergeant Anya Sharma, sir. She was attached last minute from Special Operations Command. Orders came down from General Madsen's office. Her file says she has specialized experience in analog marksmanship and unconventional threats. Davies's expression soured. Analog was a dirty word in his vocabulary. It meant slow, imprecise, and vulnerable. He walked over to Sharma, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He looked down at her, then at the rifle case at her feet. Sergeant, he began, his tone dripping with condescension. I'm sure you were an excellent shot in your day, but this is a Tier 1 operation. We are facing a technologically sophisticated adversary. They employ advanced counter-sniper systems, acoustic detectors, and hunter-killer drones. Your relic, he gestured dismissively toward her rifle, is a liability. It has no IFF tag, it can't interface with our network, and its acoustic signature is probably off the charts. Can you even provide real-time targeting data to the strike teams? The entire room was silent. Rook Miller wore a smug grin. This was it. The old-timer was about to be put in her place. Sharma met the colonel's gaze without blinking. Her own was steady, unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the hum of the electronics. My rifle puts rounds on target, sir, she said simply. The network is in my head. A few of the younger soldiers stifled a laugh. The sheer audacity of the statement was almost comical. Davies's jaw tightened. He saw her reply not as confidence, but as insubordination born of ignorance. He was a man who dealt in data in gigabytes and encrypted signals. The idea of a human brain competing with a supercomputer was absurd. Is that so, Sergeant? He said, his voice cold. Well, your primitive methods will not be jeopardizing my primary team. He turned back to the holographic map. You'll be Team Bravo. I'm placing you here. He pointed to a much lower, less strategic spur of rock, set well back from the main ridges. It offered a poor angle into the valley and primarily covered a barren, empty flank. It was a token position, a place to keep her out of the way. Your job is flank security. Watch for stragglers. Try to keep up with the real fight on the comms. Master Sergeant, make sure her radio is at least functional. The dismissal was absolute. She wasn't part of the core mission. She was an afterthought. a piece of outdated equipment being warehoused on the battlefield. "Understood, sir," Sharma said, her tone utterly neutral. She showed no anger, no disappointment, no sign that the public humiliation had affected her in any way. As the briefing broke up, Rook walked past her, deliberately bumping her shoulder. "Don't worry, Grandma," he smirked. "We'll leave some for you. Just try not to shoot any rocks by mistake." Sharma didn't respond. She simply picked up her rifle case and walked out of the TOC, her calm demeanor an impenetrable fortress against their scorn. Master Sergeant Thorne watched her go, a thoughtful, uneasy expression on his face. He'd been in the service long enough to know that still waters often ran deepest, and sometimes the quietest soldiers were the ones you needed to watch the most. He had a feeling Colonel Davies had just made a very serious mistake. The ascent into the Razorback Peaks was a brutal, lung-searing climb. The air grew thin and sharp, each breath a conscious effort. The terrain was a chaotic jumble of shattered rock and steep inclines, where a single misstep could send a man tumbling hundreds of feet. The younger soldiers of Team Alpha, despite their peak physical conditioning, struggled under the weight of their advanced equipment. Their networked gear, with its heavy batteries and redundant systems, became an anchor, pulling at their shoulders and straining their backs. They moved in noisy, gasping bursts, their high-tech boots crunching loudly on the loose scree. Anya Sharma moved differently. She climbed with a steady, rhythmic pace, her body a model of efficiency. She carried less, her kit stripped down to the bare essentials. Ammunition, water, a small medical pouch, and her rifle. Her boots, old leather worn soft and molded to her feet, made almost no sound on the rocks. She seemed to be a part of the mountain, flowing over the terrain rather than fighting against it. Private Chen, gasping for air as he hauled his spotter's kit, watched her move ahead of them on the trail. She moved like a ghost, her breathing controlled, her eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. They split off at a high saddle. "Good luck on your flank, Sergeant," Rook Miller called out, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Try not to fall asleep." Sharma gave a curt nod and veered off onto a smaller, more treacherous path that led to the spur Davies had assigned her. The main team continued their climb toward the primary position on Ridge A, the prize overlook. Hours later, both teams were in position. Rook and his men established a sophisticated hide. They deployed a small camouflage screen that mimicked the surrounding rock in both the visual and thermal spectrums. Their XM21s were mounted on heavy tripods, linked to a central tablet that displayed the feeds from all their scopes simultaneously. They had a perfect, commanding view of the valley below, where a cluster of low, hardened structures marked the enemy's command node. Sharma's position was, as Davies intended, inferior. She was lower, her view partially obstructed by a crest of rock. She couldn't see the entire compound, only a section of the perimeter and the barren slopes leading away from it. But she didn't complain. She worked methodically, building her nest not with high-tech screens but with natural materials. She wedged herself into a narrow crevice between two massive boulders, using smaller rocks and clumps of hardy mountain grass to break up her silhouette. Within 30 minutes, she had vanished. To any observer, her position was just another featureless patch of rock. The wait began. The wind howled over the ridges, a mournful, cutting sound. The sun beat down, then gave way to the deep, chilling cold of the high-altitude twilight. On the command net, Team Alpha reported their status. "All systems green," Rook's voice crackled. "We have eyes on the target. Awaiting engagement orders." Colonel Davies's voice came back, confident. "Stand by, Alpha. Let's see what they've got." They didn't have to wait long. But the enemy didn't emerge from the compound. The threat came from the sky. At first, it was just a faint, high-pitched whine, almost lost in the wind. Then, from behind a distant peak, they appeared. Not a helicopter, not a jet. It was a swarm. Dozens of small, black drones, no bigger than a hawk, flying in a terrifyingly coordinated pattern. "Contact!" Chun yelled over the radio. Multiple aerial contacts, approaching fast. On his screen, the drones resolved into terrifying clarity. They were Stinger-class hunter-killers, machines designed for one purpose: counter-sniper operations. They were wickedly fast, armed with flechette cannons, and equipped with a sensor suite that could detect the heat from a rifle barrel or the sound of a gunshot from miles away. "Engage at will, Alpha," Davies commanded. The calm professionalism of Rook's team shattered. The XM-21's automated tracking systems struggled to cope. The drone's flight paths were deliberately erratic, a series of impossible jinks, climbs, and dives designed to fool prediction algorithms. The targeting reticles on their digital scopes danced wildly, unable to achieve a solid lock. "I can't get a lock," one of the snipers yelled, his voice tight with panic. "They're too fast. The system can't track them." Rook, frustrated, switched to manual. He centered his crosshairs on one of the drones and fired. The sharp crack of his rifle echoed across the peaks. He missed. The drone instantly jinked, and worse, a red light on its chassis began to blink. It had his position. Muzzle flash detected. Chen screamed, "They see us!" Before they could react, 3 of the Stinger drones broke from the swarm and dove on their position. The air filled with a sound like tearing fabric as thousands of tiny metal darts shredded their camouflage screen and pinged off the rocks around them. One of the soldiers cried out, clutching a bleeding arm. The comms dissolved into a cacophony of panicked shouts and garbled reports. The high-tech advantage had evaporated in seconds, replaced by the primitive terror of being hunted. From her inferior position, Anya Sharma watched the chaos unfold. She hadn't moved. Her radio was on low volume, the frantic chatter a distant buzz. She wasn't looking at the main swarm attacking Ridge A. She was watching the drones on the periphery, the ones flying patrol patterns. She ignored her high-powered scope for a moment, using her own eyes, then a simple pair of binoculars. The young soldiers saw a swarm of untouchable killing machines. She saw a system, and every system had a flaw. She watched them for a full 5 minutes, her mind a silent, focused computer. She saw what the digital trackers missed. As the drones executed their high-G turns, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible shudder. A microsecond of instability as the flight control surfaces fought against inertia. It was a wobble, a flicker of imperfection in their perfect, deadly dance. It was a flaw in their design. And it was her opening. The voice of Colonel Davies cut through the static, strained and desperate. "Alpha, what's your status? Take them down. You have to take them down." Rook's reply was ragged, breathless. "Negative, sir. We can't get a lock. They're too fast. They're everywhere." Another burst of flechettes ripped over their position, and a man screamed. On her lonely spur of rock, Sharma slowly pushed her rifle forward. She didn't use a fancy bipod. She settled the burlap-wrapped stock into a V-shaped notch between 2 rocks she had carefully selected, her pack wedged beneath it to provide a solid, stable base. She dialed the elevation turret on her old Leupold scope, the clicks loud and positive in the whistling wind. 2 clicks up. She gently touched her finger to the side of the stock, feeling the wind's pressure. 1.5 mils left. She didn't need a computer to tell her that. The mountain told her. She settled behind the rifle, her cheek finding the worn, familiar groove in the wooden stock. She took a slow, deep breath, then let half of it out, her body becoming utterly still. The world outside her scope disappeared. There was only the scarred mil-dot reticle, the wind, and the target. She found one of the drones on its patrol arc, flying a lazy figure-8 pattern. She didn't aim at it. She aimed at a patch of empty sky in front of it. She put the crosshairs where the drone would be when it executed its next turn, when it entered that microsecond of instability. She was predicting the wobble. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a deep, authoritative crack. The sound was nothing like the high-velocity snap of the XM-21's. It was a heavier, more resonant boom that seemed to be swallowed by the vastness of the peaks. For a second, nothing happened. Then, on the command net, Private Chen's voice, which had been shouting warnings, cut off mid-word. He was looking through his own powerful optics, and he saw it. Miles away, one of the Stinger drones, seemingly untouched, simply ceased to exist. It vanished in a silent, expanding puff of black smoke and shattered components. A dead silence fell over the radio network. Every soldier on Ridge A, every controller in the TOC, had seen the drone icon blink out on their tactical displays. Back in her nest, Sharma worked the bolt on her rifle. The motion was an extension of her will, smooth, powerful, and efficient. She chambered a new round, ejected the spent casing, acquired a new target. She saw another drone break off from the main swarm, likely moving to investigate the destruction of its fellow. It flew a faster, more aggressive pattern. She breathed, calmed her heart. She led the target by an impossible distance, a calculation of speed, distance, and bullet travel time that she performed by instinct. She factored in the wobble. Squeezed. Crack. Another drone, another puff of smoke. The impossible had happened again. Now, the remaining drones seemed to react. Their pack intelligence registered a new, lethal threat from an unexpected quarter. Two of them broke off and streaked toward her general position, their sensors sweeping the mountainside. Sharma ignored them. She had already found her third target, one that was hovering, directing the others. A node in the network. She took an extra second, refining her aim. The wind swirled, and she made a minute adjustment, a slight shift of pressure on the stock. Crack. The command drone exploded in a shower of sparks, its demise sending a ripple of confusion through the rest of the swarm. They faltered, their coordinated attack patterns breaking down into chaos. She had decapitated the beast. In the space of 30 seconds, with 3 rounds, she had done what an entire team of high-tech snipers had failed to do. She had turned the tide. In the TOC, Colonel Davies stared at the holographic map, his mouth agape. 3 enemy icons had vanished from the board, all originating from the same firing position. A position he had dismissed as useless. "Who the hell is firing?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Who has effective fire on those targets?" "Alpha, report." There was a moment of static, then Private Chen's voice came over the net. It was stripped of panic, replaced by sheer, unadulterated awe. He had his spotting scope trained on the rocky spur where they had left the old sergeant. He could just make out the faint heat signature of her rifle barrel. "Sir, it's Sergeant Sharma," Chen stammered. "It's Team Bravo." Davies was stunned into silence. "Team Bravo? With that thing? How is that possible? They're moving at over 200 knots. Master Sergeant Thorne stood behind him, listening to the resonant boom of Sharma's rifle over the command channel. The sound was distinctive, familiar from old training videos he'd seen years ago. That, combined with her impossible accuracy, triggered a memory deep in his professional subconscious. A name, program. On his own terminal, away from the colonel's furious gaze, he typed in a priority override code and accessed Sharma's sealed service record. Most of the file was a wall of black redactions, entire paragraphs and pages deemed too sensitive for even a master sergeant's clearance. But a few keywords had been left, fragments of a hidden history. Project. Chimera. Classification. Eyes only. Specialization. Analog countermeasures to autonomous warfare systems. He scrolled down, his eyes widening. He saw mission code names from conflicts that were never officially acknowledged. He saw commendations signed by generals whose names were spoken only in whispers. And then he saw it next to her name. A single, stark entry. Call sign, Kestrel. Thorne felt a chill run down his spine. Kestrel wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. A ghost story that senior NCOs told young recruits to scare them into practicing their win charts. A mythical sniper from the Ghost program of the early drone wars. A unit created specifically to hunt and kill rogue AI and advanced robotic threats using purely mechanical, non-digital methods. They were the ones who wrote the book on how to kill machines that could think. It was said that Kestrel could shoot the optic off a flying drone from 2 miles away, that she could hit a target based on the sound it made. He had always assumed the stories were exaggerations, battlefield myths. Her rifle wasn't a relic. It was an instrument purpose-built by the Chimera program. The scarred stock was perfectly weighted for stability. The burlap wrap wasn't for camouflage. It was a hardened epoxy resin that dampened barrel harmonics to an insane degree. The old Leupold scope had its lenses ground from a special quartz composite that minimized digital glare and ghosting from active sensor sweeps. It was a weapon designed not to interface with a network, but to be invisible to one. Thorne turned from his terminal and keyed his own mic, his voice cutting through the stunned silence on the command net. He spoke directly to Davies, but his words were for everyone listening. His tone was no longer that of a subordinate. It was freighted with a gravity that bordered on reverence. "Colonel," Thorne said, his voice low and clear, "her call sign is Kestrel." The name dropped into the TOC like a thunderclap. For the younger soldiers like Rook, it meant nothing. But for Davies, for Thorne, for the other senior officers and NCOs patched into the net from headquarters, the name changed everything. It was like discovering that the quiet old librarian in town was actually the boogeyman. The mockery, the dismissal, the condescending certainty of technological superiority. It all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a profound, chilling realization. They hadn't sent a relic to the slaughter. They had sent a legend to work. The remaining Stinger drones, their pack logic shattered by the loss of their command unit, reverted to a more primitive protocol. Find and destroy the primary threat. Their erratic flight patterns ceased, replaced by a direct, furious convergence. More than a dozen of the deadly machines altered course, streaking across the sky directly toward the rocky spur where Sharma was hidden. They had pinpointed her. On Ridge A, Rook Miller watched the tactical display in horror as the swarm of red icons descended on the single blue icon representing Team Bravo. His arrogance, his smug certainty, had been sandblasted away by the 3 thunderous cracks of Sharma's rifle. He had been humbled, reduced from the star of the show to a spectator at a masterclass. "Kestrel, they're coming for you," he yelled into his radio, his voice raw with genuine concern. He used the call sign without thinking. "You've got multiple hostiles inbound. Get down. Displace." There was no reply. Through his high-powered scope, he could see her position. There was no movement, no sign of panic. Just the occasional puff of rock dust as she made minute adjustments to her hide. She was waiting for them. Colonel Davies, his entire strategic philosophy upended in the span of a minute, made a decision. His voice, when it came back on the net, was different. The arrogant certainty was gone, replaced by the crisp, focused tone of a commander who finally understood the asset he had on the field. "All units, this is Vigilance 6, he commanded, his voice sharp and clear. "Shift all fire to provide cover for Sergeant Sharma's position. I want a wall of lead around her. Miller, your team is to suppress the ridge opposite her nest. Anything that moves over there, you kill it. Do not let them get a shot at her. Use everything you've got. Your new priority is to protect the asset." The shift in language was seismic. Sharma was no longer a liability, an afterthought, or Team Bravo. She was the asset, the single most important element on the battlefield. Rook didn't hesitate. "Roger that, 6. Alpha Team, you heard the man. Shift fire. Suppressive fire on grid coordinate 4-7, Niner. Light it up." Humbled and newly motivated by a purpose they could understand, his team obeyed instantly. Their high-tech rifles, useless against the flying drones, were now repurposed. They unleashed a furious volley of suppressive fire on the opposite mountainside, their rounds chewing up rock and dirt, forcing any potential ground support for the drones to keep their heads down. They were no longer trying to be the heroes. They were the supporting cast, and they played their part with a desperate ferocity. They were protecting a legend at work. Sharma remained a bubble of preternatural calm in the storm. The whine of the approaching drones grew from a faint hum to a terrifying shriek. She ignored the suppressive fire from Miller's team, ignored the frantic calls on the radio. Her world had once again narrowed to the circular view of her scope. A drone came into view, diving straight at her. It was a head-on shot, the most difficult of all. The target profile was minuscule. but she saw the twin optical sensors on its chassis, glowing faintly. She didn't aim for the body. She aimed for the eyes. Breathe. Squeeze. Crack. The drone's dive faltered. It cartwheeled through the air, trailing smoke. Its guidance system shattered. It slammed into the mountainside 100 yards below her, exploding in a ball of flame. Another drone tried to flank her, coming in low and fast. She worked the bolt, tracked the target, and fired. The shot took off one of its maneuvering fins. The drone spun out of control, tumbling end over end until it disintegrated against a rock face. Cycle. Breathe. Squeeze. Fire. It was a rhythm, a deadly cadence she had perfected over a lifetime. She was no longer just a soldier. She was an artist, and her medium was ballistics. Each shot was a masterpiece of physics and instinct, a perfect union of human and machine. The last Stinger drone, the alpha of the remaining pack, executed a desperate, high-speed attack run. It screamed toward her position, its flechette cannon spitting a stream of metal darts that shredded the air around her hide. Chips of rock stung her face. She didn't flinch. She held her aim steady, her reticle locked on the drone's central processing unit, a spot no bigger than a fist. She waited, letting it close the distance, letting its own speed become its undoing. At the last possible second, she squeezed the trigger. The deep boom of her rifle was followed by a profound, ringing silence. The drone exploded not 50 feet from her position, the concussion wave washing over her, rattling her bones. Shrapnel rained down around her. And then, there was nothing but the sound of the wind, whistling its lonely song over the now empty peaks. The return to FOB vigilance was quiet, heavy with an unspoken tension. The triumphant swagger of Rook's team was gone, replaced by a somber, introspective mood. They moved with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The news of what had happened on the Razorbacks had spread through the base like wildfire. The story was already taking on the sheen of myth, the forgotten sergeant with the antique rifle who had single-handedly destroyed an entire swarm of hunter-killer drones. No one mocked Anya Sharma now. As she walked across the dusty compound, soldiers stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. They gave her a wide berth, their expressions a mixture of awe, fear, and a deep, newfound respect. They were looking at a living ghost, a relic who had proven to be more lethal than their most advanced technology. Later that evening, Sharma sat alone by the perimeter fence, cleaning her rifle under the dim yellow light of a generator-powered lamp. The process was a ritual, as ingrained in her as breathing. She cleaned every component with meticulous care, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She heard footsteps crunching in the gravel behind her. It was Corporal Miller. Rook stood there for a long moment, shifting his weight, clearly struggling with what to say. The arrogant, cocksure boy from the briefing was gone. In his place was a humbled young man who had witnessed something he couldn't comprehend. He didn't offer a clumsy apology. He knew words were inadequate. Instead, he reached into his rucksack and pulled out a fresh, unopened cardboard box. He placed it gently on the canvas mat beside her cleaning kit. It was a box of 762mm Federal Gold Medal match ammunition, with a 175-grain Sierra Match King boat-tail hollow point. It was the best ammunition money could buy, far superior to the standard-issue ball ammo she had been given. It was the ammunition he had reserved for himself, for the most critical shots. We had some extra," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the ground. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. Sharma paused her work. She looked at the box, then up at him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes seemed to soften for just a fraction of a second. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. It was acceptance. It was forgiveness. Rook nodded back, a wave of relief washing over him. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving the offering as a silent testament to his respect. The gesture was more meaningful than any salute. An hour later, another figure approached through the darkness. Colonel Davies. He stopped a few feet away, the light catching the silver eagles on his collar. He looked tired, older than he had that morning. He watched her for a moment as she finished reassembling her rifle, the bolt sliding home with a satisfying metallic click. "I read your file, Sergeant," Davies said, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier authority. "The parts that weren't blacked out, anyway. Project Chimera? I had no idea." Sharma didn't look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on the dark, jagged silhouette of the mountains on the horizon. "Files don't stop drones, sir." The simple truth of her statement hung in the cold air between them. Davies nodded slowly. "No," he admitted. "They don't. Actions do." He paused, searching for the right words to bridge the chasm of his own ignorance. He couldn't apologize. His pride and his rank wouldn't allow for that. But he could offer something else. Trust. "There's a storm front moving in tomorrow," he said. "Air support will be grounded. The entire base will be on high alert. The watch is yours if you want it. You pick the positions. You coordinate the overwatch. The perimeter is yours." It was an extraordinary concession. He was handing command of the base's defense, its very survival, to the woman he had dismissed and humiliated just hours before. It was the ultimate admission of his error and the highest form of professional respect he could offer. Sharma finally turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes held his for a long moment. Then she gave that same single economical nod. Davies held her gaze, then turned and walked back toward the TOC, a man whose understanding of warfare had been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. Alone again, Sharma remained by the fence, a solitary guardian watching over the sleeping base. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of the coming storm. She reached into a small pocket on her belt and pulled out a worn, smooth whetstone and a well-used combat knife. Under the cold, distant light of the stars, she began to sharpen the blade. The rhythmic, scraping sound of stone on steel, shhk, filled the night. It was an ancient, grounding ritual, a quiet promise of readiness. Her work was not done. It was never done. In the silent, methodical maintenance of her tools, in the patient watch over the dark and dangerous world, she found her peace. The legend was on watch, and the FOB was safe.